Happy New Year from downtown Kyiv. I've been getting a lot of questions since I've been here, like what are you doing over there? Why are you in Ukraine? And isn't it dangerous? Well, to answer that last question, I feel pretty safe here, despite there having been 2 air raid sirens go off last night and an explosion somewhere across the river. But for the most part, the armed forces of Ukraine are doing a darn good job shooting down almost all the missiles and drones that Russia continues to launch at the city day after day after day. So many so that it doesn't even really make the international news anymore. But yeah, I feel pretty safe here in Kyiv. I've only been so far to Lviv and Kyiv, neither of which are very close to the front lines. If you were in a frontline city like Kherson or Kharkiv, you would be 10 or 100 times more at risk than someone living here in Kyiv. And if you were in the army on the front lines, facing Russian attacks every single day, you'd probably be 10 or 100 times more at risk than the civilians in those frontline cities. So there's kind of like a scale of danger here, and I'm in one of the safest places in Kyiv here. People aren't even bothering to go down to shelters anymore when you hear an air raid, because there's just too many of them. It's happening almost every day. So why is this war happening? It's a complicated question, and it goes back probably hundreds of years if you really want to get into all of the Ukraine-Russia history. But this war that's happening now is really started 11 years ago with something that happened right here on the Maidan Square. In 2013, there were massive protests here as a result of Ukraine's then-president, Viktor Yanukovych, reneging on his promise and refusing to sign a European Association Agreement, opting instead to take a loan offer from Vladimir Putin. People were furious about this betrayal, and Yanukovych was increasingly seen as a Putin puppet. Despite brutally cold weather, young people came out to the square in increasingly large numbers. The president ordered a brutal crackdown on the peaceful protesters, which involved beatings and mass arrests. But this crackdown just inflamed the passions of the protesters even further, and the protests grew and grew in size, attracting people from Kyiv and cities all over the country. It lasted for 3 months, involved hundreds of thousands of people, and culminated with the government security forces opening fire on the protesters, including by snipers on the top of the nearby Hotel Ukraine, which is where I was staying for my first 3 nights here in Kyiv, with more than 100 protesters being killed and over 1,000 injured. The people would not be dissuaded, and eventually the government was forced to step down. Yanukovych fled to Russia, and guess what? He's still there 11 years later. The Ukrainians had won their fight to get out from under Russian rule, but the victory would be short-lived. 5 days after Yanukovych fled the country, on February 27, 2014, Russian special forces invaded Crimea and forcefully took control of government and police buildings there. That was the start of the war that's been raging between Ukraine and Russia for 11 years now. The best analogy I can think of for the situation between Russia and Ukraine is one of a toxic, abusive relationship. Ukraine was forced into an abusive relationship with Russia and has been trying to escape it for literally hundreds of years. In 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine held a referendum in which they voted overwhelmingly to declare independence and freedom from the old Soviet world. Since then, as Russia has fallen under the increasingly firm grip of its de facto dictator, Vladimir Putin, it has tried every trick in the book to force Ukraine back under its grip of terror. This culminated in the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces in February 2022. Russia is saying to Ukraine, if I can't have you, I will destroy you. And it is attempting to fulfill that evil promise. Since 2022, Russia has targeted Ukraine with over 10,000 missiles, bombs, and drone strikes. That's an average of over 20 per day for 3 years, mostly targeting civilian infrastructure like power and water facilities, but also including hospitals, schools, and civil residences. This is a David and Goliath story that has surprised and shocked the world. Back in 2022, people were saying Kyiv would fall in 3 days, and yet here it still stands. Russia continues its onslaught, but the resolve of the Ukrainian people to not fall back into enslavement by Moscow, together with the blood, sweat, and sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of brave men and women in the armed forces of Ukraine, and with the aid and provision of arms by the freedom-loving Western world, Ukraine still stands defiantly. The coming months are going to be critical for the future of this country, this region, and in fact, the world. If the free world stands up to Putin and helps Ukraine to withstand this merciless onslaught of terror, it will send a message that good can triumph over evil, and wars of aggression don't pay off. But if Ukraine falls, then autocratic dictators like Putin around the world will be emboldened. Ukraine's resources and armor will be turned against the West, and evil will be on the march. We simply can't let that happen. So please keep this wonderful, courageous country in your thoughts and prayers as we start this new year. Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine, and God bless America.